Welcome to Founders and Startups. This is Lisa Connor's Vote. I'm an executive coach who partners with founders and visionary leaders to help them create extraordinary results, even in the most challenging of times. You can learn more about me at everbetteryou.com. And today I'm here with my guest, Peter Mellen, who's founder of Netcito, and he does many other things beyond Netcito that we'll talk about in the coming minutes. Hey there, Peter. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Lisa.
So I'm going to read a brief introduction for Peter, and then we're going to get into our chat. But I wanted to set the stage because Peter's involved in so many different things, and I wanted to give you a little bit of context before we jump into our conversation. Peter Mellen's a lifelong entrepreneur, and he lives in the DC area. I know Peter as someone who loves to bring people together to help elevate their projects. And he's a mindful individual who's very devoted to his family and generously shares his knowledge. Peter wouldn't say this himself, but I suspect that he's influenced thousands of startups throughout the country and throughout the world. And to set the stage further for our discussion, here's just a few of Peter's current roles. He's actively involved in commercial real estate investing and development. He's founder of Netcito, an invitation-only peer group for founders of companies. He's co-chair of Tides, a philanthropic partner and nonprofit accelerator dedicated to building a world of shared prosperity and social justice. And he's entrepreneur in residence at Georgetown University, where he also created the Alumni Entrepreneur Network and Angel Investor Network. So, Peter, you're a busy guy.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a great introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for being here. It's great. Your name comes up in conversations all the time. I'm in the DC area, so are you. And, as I'm talking to Peter, as I'm talking to people, they're frequently saying, hey, you got to talk to Peter Mellen about that. So you are very generous with your time and with your knowledge. And before we dig into this conversation about your entrepreneurial journey, I just want to sort of put a timestamp here. It's March 19th, 2020. And we are amidst the COVID sort of world, and things have changed a lot in the past couple of weeks. And just wanted to ask, how's your world? What's your world looking like today versus how it was a couple of weeks ago?
So my world personally, ironically, is not all that different because I work from home a lot. And it's really easy for me to do what I do virtually.
Yes.
I think the primary difference has been a lot more time on Zoom and less face-to-face. And there's certainly advantages face-to-face, but it's not a huge step down to go to kind of the slightly lower resolution world of Zoom. But what I will say, and what has been enormously impactful, particularly just over the last day or two, is that we've got a lot of members whose revenue is like as close as you can say to literally fallen off a cliff, literally gone to zero. I was on a call last night with one of our members who has a team of 30 or 40 people who work for them, a business that generates something in the neighborhood of, a couple $1 million a year in revenue, maybe north of that. Right. And it's gone to zero.
Wow.
And so, for a lot of our members, this crisis is devastating. They're looking at potentially, well, they've already laid off employees. They're looking at the threat of shutting down their business. They're looking at the threat of companies that have taken years, in some cases decades, to build that might not be around in 3 or 4 months. And so, I guess talking through those experiences with them, being with them through those experiences, I just can't help but, I can't help but feel some small part of what they're feeling. That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, when you say members, you're talking about members of your Netcito, of the Netcito network?
Yeah, primarily.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So, I work with a lot of people that are in the tech world, and for them, business actually, could be picking up because their services are needed in a different way and more. So there is also some opportunity for some entrepreneurs right now as well. And I suppose for people who've been thinking about jumping into creating a business for themselves, this might be a good time to do it. Maybe they have more time because they're at home, and they have time to work on that extra project on the side. So go ahead.
No, I do think there's some opportunity. I mean, it's rippling through the investment world too. My sense is that, investors are seeing this as a potential point where some of the venture deals that are in the pipeline, angel deals, get repriced, because it's going to be harder for the people who are raising money to be able to network, and for people to convene around that kind of thing. But to your point, any displacement like this, is, as much as there is challenge, there's also, generally an equal amount of opportunity. And it's easy to lose sight of that. It's huge. There's probably huge opportunity that's emerging right now.
Right. Yeah. So, and you have kids too, right?
Yes. 14 and 15. Yeah.
14 and 15. Yeah. So what's happening with them for school right now? What's going on in your house?
So far, the schools, I don't think, have completely caught up. And so they're spending too much time on the phone, which is its own set of crazy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we're slowly adapting. And one of the things I appreciate, our family vacation got canceled because of this. But for me, this is almost as good because we get to spend time together as a family, which I really value.
Yeah, I am hearing parents talk about playing more family games, board games. We're pulling out the old games we haven't played in a while, and I think that's awesome. It's incredible to me how well the Wi-Fi is working.
Yeah.
Are you experiencing that too?
Yeah, the internet seems to be holding up. I don't know how these video conferencing services are managing to flex so effectively with the demand, but they seem to be handling it.
Yeah, it's just incredible to me. I mean, everybody's online in Zoom. I've been on Zoom all day, every day, I feel like for the past week, and everything's working really, really well. So I'm super appreciative of that. That's definitely something that's going well right now. So yeah, and my son's turning 21 Sunday, actually. And so he's home from West Virginia University. They gave him an extra week of spring break, and then they're going to start classes online, and he's antsy and itching to get out. And, so I think we're going to go for a bike ride later, which will be nice. So I gave an introduction for you, Peter, and you're involved in so many different things. I'm curious that when you meet people, and they say, what do you do? Peter, what do you do? Because, everybody asks that in the DC area. How do you respond to that?
I shudder a little bit.
You go, do I have to answer that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've come up with a short answer, which is investor and entrepreneur, or I'd probably put the entrepreneur piece first. But I always feel guilty about saying it because I feel like it's a bit of a non-answer. Like an entrepreneur in what? But at least it gives me something to say. I mean, your introduction was perfect. If I could just run off that, sort of roughly 1 minute overview, that would probably answer the question.
Okay. So you can walk around with the video and just play it on the phone.
Exactly. I think that's what I'm going to do from this point forward.
Good. However I can be of service, it's great.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's go back a little bit further in your life, because I think of you as a lifelong entrepreneur. Oh, that's how you can introduce yourself. You say, I'm Peter Mellen, lifelong entrepreneur. Lisa says so. Do you see yourself that way? Do you see yourself as a lifelong entrepreneur?
Certainly a lifelong want to be entrepreneur.
Okay.
It's I've had varying degrees of success, and I think I think the question mark is at what point do you get to claim that? And it's funny, I think I'm more generous with other people than with myself.
Sure. Yeah.
So Reid Hoffman has an amazing book called The Startup of You, which I recommend for anyone who's really doing anything in business, right? Particularly at the front end of their career.
Mm-hmm.
And his definition of an entrepreneur in that book is like, if you've got a career, you're an entrepreneur because you have to manage your own portfolio as an entrepreneur. And I think that's like a really legitimate way to look at the world, that people can declare themselves as entrepreneurs. And it's really a mindset more than it is what you do in the world. And there's a spectrum, right? You know, at the other end, you have these icons, you know, like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, that, you know, these people that all of us want to be. And along with that, and I'm sorry, this is probably a longer answer than you asked for, but along with that, I think comes this sense, it's sort of like almost, I call it entreporn. Like it's almost that sense, that sort of glossy magazine cover version of entrepreneurship that makes the rest of us feel inadequate. And so I think it's really worth celebrating the people who do everything in between. You know, I have one person who started a very successful women's clothing boutique, and actually a fashion line as well, like a line of women's clothing, who was in that business for 5 years before she thought of herself as an entrepreneur. And I just thought she did herself a tremendous disservice, you know, really kind of understated her value, because she had been living like the essence of the entrepreneurship journey for years without acknowledging that was what she was doing. And so I think, you know, as I talk it through out loud with you, Lisa, I think there's some value in claiming it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that's why sometimes it's so great to have a conversation with someone who has a different perspective, and they reflect back to you what they see in you. You know, that's always really interesting. That's a great conversation for anyone to have. Any founder and anyone who's listening to this, ask a friend how they perceive you. And you might be blown away by what they say in a good way, I mean, it can be a scary thing to ask somebody that question because you don't know what they're going to say. But generally, people are going to give you some positive aspect of yourself, your personality, or what you're doing that you hadn't seen in yourself before. And how fascinating that she would be doing that for 5 years and not really recognizing it. Yeah, she's just like putting one foot in front of another and continuing on, right? And then lo and behold, here's this company. So what would you say was really your first entrepreneurial creative endeavor?
I guess it kind of depends on how you count.
Right.
I'm reminded of starting a computer club when I was in high school called the Night Pirates.
The Night Pirates. I love that.
A lot of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know start their businesses in sometime in K-12, you know, and start earning money at that point. And there's something about that age where I think it gets hardwired in. I guess my first real business was when I went out on my own and I started this company, Team Vision Consulting, shortly after graduating from college in the early 90s. And what we did is we did like help desk support for small and medium-sized businesses. And it was just me. I didn't have a team, but I made real money, had clients. So I guess that counts.
Absolutely. God,
Yeah.
that's so cool. What did you do after that?
Well, actually, it's funny because part of the reason that I didn't continue with that business was because I wanted to be more like Steve Jobs, right? Like I wanted to live the kind of glossy magazine version of entrepreneurship. And so I got an MBA from Georgetown, which was a game changer for me. And one of my classmates and I teamed up, and we wrote a business plan to start an online learning company, and started shopping it around. And actually, even before we graduated, we had our first investor who wrote us a check for $25,000 to help get the company started. And that snowballed into, you know, a company, a venture-backed startup that raised roughly, $17 million, a little over that in venture capital. Which at the time was a big number. It doesn't feel as big now, but it was a heck of an experience.
What year was that, Peter?
98. was the year that we started, and
Okay.
the company, we ran it through 2001. It's pretty quick.
Wow. Did you end up selling it, or what was the exit?
Technically, we sold it. You know, if it's ironic now because it's become ancient history, even though it still feels kind of fresh to me. I mean, that was the .com bust, right? So we rode
Right.
that entire wave up and really got hammered when it came down. You know, at the time, there may even be similarities. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this particular crisis unfolds. But it was
Right.
really striking at that time to be a founder who was counting on the next round of capital to continue growing the company, and literally have the window for funding just slam shut. You know, conversations that we had been having with funders, like literally overnight, you know, sorry, there's nothing more for us to talk about. We're not deploying any more capital.
Wow. Okay. So what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of months with regards to angel investing and venture capital? And you touched on that a little bit earlier, but your comments just now struck me that I should ask you, like, specifically what your thoughts are on that.
You know, it's just hard to see. I mean,
Okay.
you know, I think it's probably going to vary based on the business.
Mhm.
You know, I would imagine, you know, if you're in biotech right now and you've got some kind of a line onto managing epidemics, pandemics, you know, that could be a really good business to be in, and you probably won't have to work that hard to raise money.
Okay.
If you're doing something related to live events, or, you know, real estate, it's, you know, I would imagine, you know, particularly, you know, retail,
Yes.
I would imagine things could get pretty tough.
Yeah. Okay. So it depends on the sector. The money's not going to dry up, but it's just might shift where it was going to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, but the other thing we need to focus on as well is, you know, the market has dropped considerably, right? And so that can impact the liquidity of investors and how they manage their allocations. So, you know, it's possible that there could be less capital as well chasing these opportunities.
Yes. 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 Okay. Okay. So in your life, let's go back even further. And you grew up in sort of an unusual environment, right? You spent some time in I don't even know if I'm saying this right. Ashram?
Ashram, yeah, you got it.
Ashram. Okay. So I don't normally say that out loud. I read it, but I don't normally say it out loud. Ashram. How did that occur? Tell me about that, and how has that impacted how you see the world today?
So, you know, first, it's probably worth talking about what an ashram is. You know,
Yeah.
normally we don't unpack that. So, an ashram is in India. A lot of the Hindu religious tradition sort of gets embodied in these ashrams that are created, which are places for people in the Hindu faith to develop spiritually, right? And it's sort of, you know, arguably, you know, there's some sort of similarities, sort of like almost you can think of like the Hindu version of something like a cross between a church and a monastery. This particular ashram was started by an Indian yoga teacher who immigrated to the United States from India, and who had a teacher as well in India who had a huge following of people in India. And he came to the United States and he started teaching yoga in Philadelphia. And he was such an inspiring teacher that people sort of started to congregate around him. And he and the people, his students, started a center, which, you know, ultimately became an ashram in Pennsylvania that later sort of moved to Western Massachusetts. It became the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. And particularly at the time when he started it, they imported a lot of that Indian tradition into the United States. So there was just this amazing melding of Eastern and Western culture. And the people who were part of this community lived like monks. I mean, it was really extraordinary. People would move in and they would live on site with this community. Typically, they'd be living in rooms, you know, like a small room with a single bed and a sink. And then you'd have like a bathroom, shared bathroom down the hall. And they would take not quite vows, but make commitments to poverty and abstinence. So they would live on a stipend of about $100 a month. They would practice what's the yoga discipline of brahmacharya, which is restraint in how we manage all of our energy, including our sexual energy. And they'd live a lifestyle where they'd get up at 4:30 in the morning, meditate, do yoga, eat an all vegetarian diet, spend the day working and building out this community in various ways, whether it was on the landscaping crew where I worked for a while, or in the kitchen, or running programs for people from outside in the community, teaching yoga and teaching massage and different forms of healing. And then after dinner, they would go for a 2-hour lecture in the evening that included sort of these aspects of meditation and dance and that kind of thing. And then, bed by 9 o'clock, right? So, but it was this like monastic life. And that was like my second family. A friend of mine who grew up there described it as like the soil in which I grew up. And it was sort of funny because on the one hand, I was like living a conventional American life. And I was like, this is from the time I was about 11 until the time I was 18. And there was nothing that I wanted more to do than be normal. And so nobody knew that I like had this hidden world, because yoga was not cool then, right? Yoga was really weird. Not to mention this whole thing of like people meditating and, kind of, learning literally at the feet of a guru, an Indian guru. But on the flip side, people would come into this community and I would literally watch them get younger. Like you could tell someone who had been in residence for a year because they would glow. Their spirits shone so bright. And it was this experience of walking down the hall, and I would run into like my buddy Narendra. Everyone had Sanskrit names, including me. I got a Sanskrit name.
Which was what?
Radhesham. And instead of shaking hands, I don't know if it'd work in today's environment, right? Instead of shaking hands, you'd hug each other, right?
Oh, wow.
And most conversations would end with like, "I love you, brother." And it was like authentic, right? And so that kind of connection, like for me, was like I got used to that as kind of like being normal. And particularly as I got older and emerged, and there was a period of my life where I really sort of leaned hard into the more conventional definition of success. I think it showed up as more acutely missing for me because I'd had that experience as a teenager.
Wow. So I'm just so curious about, how did you end up there when you were 11 years old? What was going on with your family?
I had really unconventional parents.
I suspect.
When I was born, they were both college professors. They both taught. My mom taught urban geography, which is now most people think of as urban planning. My dad taught art history, and they switched careers when I was roughly in kindergarten, maybe first grade, and made documentary films for 10 years. And we lived like out in the wilds of Canada. They really embraced the sort of back to the land aesthetic of the 70s. And it was when we were living in Canada that they took their first yoga class, which was an outreach yoga class. Like this Kripalu had sent teachers all around North America who would go out and teach yoga, and they tried this yoga thing and got interested and visited the ashram. And so that was what eventually led us there.
That is so cool. So were you living there full time, or did you guys have a residence outside of the ashram?
We chose to get a residence outside the ashram. It wasn't a great environment for families. Most of the people who lived there were single, with a few couples. And there was one other family there, I think, that actually lived on site. And then we lived like literally just up the hill, like 2 or 3 minutes away.
So how has that impacted you? Like, how do you carry that through to your life today? For people who are watching on video, you'll see some interesting things behind Peter. So that's one thing maybe you can talk about. But yeah, how does that still live with you today?
So I sometimes think of myself as having preacher's kid syndrome, right? The idea that,
Right? Yeah.
the way that it influenced me as a teenager, and certainly, in young adulthood, my kind of 20s and even to some extent my early 30s, was that I sort of, I saw it as kind of soft and a little weird, right? So I thought, okay,
Yeah.
there's some value here, but like, are these guys really like engaging in the world? Like, are they really creating something of value? And it wasn't completely clear to me that this was time well spent.
Okay.
And
Sure.
I really worshipped is a little too strong, but like really looked up to icons like Steve Jobs before Steve Jobs was cool. Like there was a period where Steve Jobs was really cool. He was Times Man of the Year when he launched Apple Computer, but he went through a period where like
Yeah.
he sort of fell from grace, right? Before he became the true icon that he is now. And I stuck with him all the way.
Hmm.
And really kind of aspired to that vision of sort of the self-made, mega successful entrepreneur, and spent a lot of my time in my early 20s aspiring to it, and largely, I don't know if I would say I quite turned away from the ashram, but it was like I embraced that vision of success so fully that that it really took most of my attention.
Okay.
And in particular at Headlight, this is the startup that I founded in Silicon Valley. I think I sort of got to see where that path led. And there was a point, we were pretty successful. I mean, my friends would sort of come out to visit me in San Francisco, and they'd see this office with 60 people and all of these, industry events that we would go to, and they'd say, wow, like what's happened to you? And ironically, even when we were kind of like at our peak in terms of thriving with that business and on this really strong growth trajectory, it was taking a toll internally. Like I just didn't feel completely wired to be able to handle it well. And it just felt over and over again like something was missing. And then as the .com meltdown happened and the stress started to build up, it got to a point where it was just unsustainable. Like, where it was like, I felt like in some ways I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I turned to yoga actually, because it was the only thing that I felt like, would have a chance of enabling me to handle this. And like, so ironically, after growing up in ashram, I took my first yoga class when I think I was 35.
What?
Yeah.
You never? Oh, that's really funny. So you never took a yoga class when you were at the ashram?
No, it was really more about hanging out with people when I was
Wow,
at
that's so
the ashram.
interesting.
And so I guess I'd probably taken a couple of classes there, but I hadn't really kind of embraced it. And it was that, along with a number of other things, that sort of had me realize there's so much missing in this narrow definition that a lot of people think of as what success is, and I'm talking not just success in terms of financially, right? Like some people will go and start there, but if you talk with entrepreneurs, most of them will tell you that they're not in it for the money, right? They're in it for like the whole thing, right? They're in it for the impact that they can have on the world and creativity and all of these sort of like, this sort of, the influence that they can have, right? And the opportunity to sort of be around other creative people. All that's legitimate, but it's not enough. And so what I came to realize in this journey that in some ways began with this one yoga class at the in San Francisco is that is that this path that had been to some extent dormant for 15 years prior was actually hugely relevant. That the way in which we sort of nourish ourselves, I want to say spiritually, but that has too much of a valence to it. Like people think spiritual and they're back in, the ashram. But I think nourishing ourselves in terms of our creative spirit, in terms of our connection with others and our connection with self, in terms of harvesting the wisdom that lives in our body, and that lives through our interconnectedness with our physical self, but also the world around us and the people around us, that really without it, we're sort of worse than rudderless. Like I think we to some extent suffer. And so a lot of this theme, really from the ashram forward, from the time I was 11 in my life, has been kind of like exploring the intersection of these two worlds, right? Of this, on the one hand, the kind of what I would call the secular world in conventional success, and on the other hand, the spiritual world. And like it's easy to kind of like look at them as competing, and so much of my life has been like, where do we find the intersection? How do these two things fit together in ways that that I don't know, complementary is too easy. It's more just how do you get to that intersection? How do you find the best in them?
And I like that you used the word dormant. Like some of that was dormant. It wasn't, you didn't reject it. You just weren't tapping into that. And so I think for a lot of people listening to this, there's some aspect of us that's dormant that we can tap into at the right time. So that's a pretty powerful message. Thanks for sharing all that, Peter. Thanks for asking. It's so unique and incredible. And so I referenced the items behind you on the mantle for people who are watching this on video. They can say, tell me what's behind you.
Those are both gifts from my dad. I guess starting from, I don't know what left and right is, but there's a statue of Shiva that's a gift from my dad, a statue of the Buddha that's a gift from my dad. It surprises me, he has this thing of, occasionally, whether it's for a holiday or for a birthday, sending these things. And when I get them, I'm always sort of not quite sure. But what I've seen over time is that they call me in really subtle ways, actually back to this path. It's amazing the power that they have. So there's that. And then you're also looking at the picture of the one year that I coached my son's hockey team.
Oh, nice.
Which was an incredible experience and a great learning experience. And then a painting that friends gave me for one of my milestone birthdays. Oh,
that's awesome. Cool. So where are you now on yoga, meditation, sort of what we consider mindfulness practices? How's that all playing out in your life today?
Well, yeah, it's funny. It took years to develop, but I went from that one yoga class to sort of doing one every couple months, to more and more frequency, to the point now where I practice 5 or 6 times a week of yoga, an hour a day. Mm-hmm. And then I've also got a daily meditation practice as well. So I think about the yoga as meditation, but it's sort of like a moving meditation. I think that still meditation is also important. People talk about yoga. Actually, the purpose of yoga is to prepare the body for meditation. And so that practice, I'd like to be at 20 minutes twice a day. That's a hard number to hit, but really any number, any day makes a difference. And so I definitely get, at least 5 or 10 minutes in daily. And on good days, I'll get probably 20 or 30. And it's amazing the extent to which I feel like those form the ground, the foundation for everything. I was recently actually looking for a quote. Albert Einstein talked about how most of his ideas came from a place that's beyond the mind. Right. And I think if you talk to a lot of people who are in creative spaces, they'll tell you the same thing. And I think a lot of access to that creative spark comes from not so much quieting the mind as attending to the space that's beyond it as well as within it. And so that's what the practice means to me, at least at the beginning of it.
What's your favorite place to practice yoga?
I have a spot on my back porch which overlooks our nicely landscaped backyard, and so it's a beautiful, quiet space that's connected to nature, where you can hear the birds chirp and the planes flying overhead.
Right.
Have the sun shine on me. I'll go out there sometimes during the winter when it'll be 10 degrees outside. It's amazing how a blanket can give you enough warmth to sit even in that kind of cold. And there's these moments of just bliss, like bliss that I'll experience where I often have this experience in meditation where when I sit down, my mind is so active and I'm so fully identified, like so fully kind of immersed in whatever thoughts I have, that for a while, I even forget why I'm there, right? Like the point of meditation is, the starting point is to focus on your breathing, right? Yes. And it'll take me 3 or 4 minutes just to remember, oh yeah, the breath, right.
Yeah.
And so there'll be this moment at which sort of I kind of get settled enough that I'm noticing the breath, and suddenly I'll notice the birds, which had been invisible before, right? And so and it's like, and so as my attention opens up to that broader world around me, what'll occasionally happen, whether it's a 10-degree day or 70-degree day, is I'll feel a breeze. And there's something about that when I'm quiet enough to actually feel the air move, that's bliss. It's just an incredible experience.
Wow. That's amazing. That's really cool. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that too. Okay, so let's transition a little bit. So I want to read you a few sentences and get your thoughts on these. I want to have you finish these sentences. We're going to do a little Mad Libs. So how would you answer this? How would you finish this sentence? The most successful companies are?
Oh, the most successful companies are true to their values.
Great. The least successful companies are?
Focused primarily on revenue or money to the expense of other things.
Okay. And when I think of the future, I am?
If we're doing it Rorschach style, I would say optimistic.
I'm glad you said that. That's the answer I wanted you to say. I think I'm conveying that answer to you. What else would you, but what would you add to that? What else are you thinking about that? When you think of the future, you are?
So much of the work that I do, coming back to your first question, is around encouraging innovation and connection. You know, actually, so the meaning of Netcito is based on the Latin word incito, to inspire.
Oh, beautiful.
So that's the cito part of it, and then the net was the closest I could come when I was looking for domain names to this notion of connection, right? So net for network.
Great.
But so it's to connect and inspire, and that really kind of gets close to the mission that I see. So one of the trends that I see in entrepreneurship is that consumers are increasingly requiring the products and services that they buy to be to have some form of social impact.
Yes.
Or at least to kind of minimize negative externalities, right? But they're
Yes.
sort of expecting companies to be good corporate social citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of why I'm optimistic. I think things are trending in the direction of creating, in particularly too with this generation of young people, right? The millennials and Gen Zers. Things are really trending in the direction of people who are realizing the crises that we're facing, whether it's the climate crisis or the wealth gap or the challenges that we're having on our political dialogue, and that they truly want to do something about it. And what's really interesting that didn't exist when I was living in the ashram, or when I was kind of during, in my I call it, for lack of a better word, my yuppie days, right? Is that people are increasingly building that into business and expecting that companies sort of incorporate meaning and mission into their work. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm seeing that more and more too. I love that. Yeah, that does make me optimistic. And I work with a lot of, as you do, I work with a lot of college students. And God, I'm so inspired by what they're creating and how they're going about creating it, and their awareness of the larger world. Like, I didn't have that. I definitely didn't have that at their age. And so it's impressive. And they'll rise to the challenge of whatever COVID-19 brings in the coming weeks, months, years. So, all right. So almost final question. If someone's considering starting a company right now, but they're afraid to give up their regular paycheck, what would you say to them?
Yeah, so I've seen this, many times, right? And it's not, I choose to frame it. I'll get to that question, but I think there's also kind of this larger question. It's not just people who are giving up their paycheck for starting a company, but who are also sort of somewhere along the entrepreneurial path and sort of exploring that question of, do I risk more, right? Do I put more chips on the table by like taking out a home loan or whatever that is?
Right.
One thing I'll say is that there tends to be kind of a bias in the entrepreneurial world of leaning into risk no matter what, of sort of like ignoring whatever your gut is telling you in terms of, where there might be fear, and being like, oh, we need to just, power through and go ahead. And I think it's a mistake to fight that. I think the fear can be really healthy. And that often there's a third way, and that often by listening to that voice, we can sort of, it might be telling us that there are other things that we need to do before taking that kind of a risk. Mm-hmm. And like, to give you an example, if you're thinking about, and we'll get back to the person who's thinking about giving up a paycheck, right?
Okay.
But if you're thinking about taking out a mortgage on your home, maybe you want to check with customers, before doing that, and make sure that your idea is solid. Maybe you want to line up some revenue commitments in advance before you do it. It's not that taking out a mortgage is a good idea. It's that when your gut is telling you there's risk, it might be appropriate to take steps, practical steps to address the risk or speak to the risk before you move. Mm-hmm. Your gut might still be speaking with you, but there are ways you might be able to speaking to you. There might be ways in which you can do it in more harmony. When it comes to giving up a paycheck, I've seen like really unfortunate outcomes because people took on too much risk in a way that could have been avoided. Yes. I've seen people lose their retirement savings. I've seen people sort of, I don't know, derailing the careers is sort of a little strong because you can sort of generally get back on the track. Right. But I have seen people go through some really big challenges. And so I do think if you're getting a paycheck and you're looking at a company, sort of the headline is, do your homework and also do it responsibly as well. Like in terms of looking at your savings and what you can afford in terms of a burn rate. Yes. Coming back to Reid Hoffman, the Startup Review, such a great resource for entrepreneurs. He talks about having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan Z. And entrepreneurs, that's generally a great idea for entrepreneurs. So plan A is where your primary bet is, right? And if you've got a job, you're probably working on plan A and you're counting on plan A to pay your rent and your mortgage. Plan B is your side hustle, right? Okay. That's the thing that maybe, you're looking at to kind of like blow up, right? And at some point, if you're an entrepreneur, maybe you switch A and B so that B becomes the primary thing. And then plan Z is if it all goes to zero, as it has lately, right? Yeah. Like what's then? And so for a lot of people, that's your parents' couch or your old bedroom, right? Or for some people, it's a friend's couch. But there are entrepreneurs out there, for whom there is no plan Z. And if your plan Z is living on the street, it might be a good idea to kind of build up some buffer before you give up the paycheck.
Yeah. Great advice. Thank you. I can't end this discussion without thanking you, because I looked this up before we started recording. I started podcasting I put out my first podcast December 2015, and which is a direct result of a discussion or interaction that you and I had, Peter, at Camp Good Life Project. Shout out to Jonathan Fields, Stephanie Fields, and all their amazing crew.
Yes.
That was back in August 2015. I said out loud that I wanted to do a podcast, and who am I to do a podcast, et cetera, et cetera. And then here's the very short story. So I said that out loud to Peter, and then Peter stood up and shared that with the room with my permission, and then everybody applauded. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? Like, here's permission for me to do it. So I needed that permission for whatever reason. So I went forth and created a podcast, 90 episodes of Ever Better. And then I put that to bed, and now I'm doing Founders and Startups. And so here we are, almost 5 years later. It's awesome.
Oh my gosh. So that's amazing. I can't believe that moment had such an impact. I'm so grateful that it did, and grateful to Jonathan too for creating that space. What an incredible experience that was, and what a gift the Good Life Project is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Good Life Project podcast and Camp Good Life Project is no more. Like a good entrepreneur, he did it for 5 years and said, no, now we're done. Right? But there's plenty of programs that he's got out there that are wonderful to tap into. So including the Sparketype assessment, which is awesome. I love that. So yeah. So, well, thank you for being here, Peter. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Oh yeah, please feel free to reach out, peter@netcito.com. We've got our Netcito website, so that's probably the best front door, but certainly on any of the things that I'm involved with, I always welcome those conversations. Okay, great. Fantastic. So any final thoughts? I mean, you've shared a lot. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for this conversation, for you, for our time together. Any final thoughts that you want to share? If I had one way of summarizing all of this weird journey of entrepreneurship that I've covered so far, and what I've learned from it, right? And through this unique lens of doing everything from growing up in a yoga ashram to getting an MBA to doing a venture-backed startup to now convening these CEO forums for entrepreneurs. It's that what keeps surprising me is the degree to which the path of entrepreneurship lives in the moment. And I know that may sound a little zen, but like really practically speaking, the place where I see entrepreneurs being most successful is when they sort of lean into uncertainty, into that space where we're not sure what we're going to say next, into connecting with other people, into trusting their intuition in their gut, into trusting, all of us trusting in our own, whatever it is that we have to give to the world, right? And doubling down on that, doubling down on what's good. So I don't know if there's a super clean way to summarize it, but you know, I guess what I would say is it kind of lives in contrast to where some entrepreneurs get stuck, which is sort of like being on their computer trying to obsessively come up with the best idea or the best business plan.
Right.
Like it lives in relationship with ourselves, with others. And so hopefully that's of some value and means something.
It is. I love that. God, I love that. Yeah, your perspective is so incredible. What a journey. So thank you, Peter Mellen, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Lisa. I so appreciate the opportunity.